So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what I call the geometry of the flow. So to recap, what we have discussed so far are these threshold points and how driveway might be a threshold, and that area along the public walkway might be a threshold, and if you had a gate back here, there would be a threshold. And if we were starting to look at some flow going through this space, we would say that there would be the potential maybe to do a sitting space here or here. So some kind of sitting space out there near the gate. That's often where we'll look at a fire pit. In this case, there would be a sitting space near the back door. This is often your entertainment area where the barbecue sits. And the other one I look at is, so this would actually be the priority, is the one that you would entertain at or is really handy to the back door. The fire pit might be the second. And as far as hierarchy goes, I always feel like there's something missing if we don't put it over here, a little something over there in the corner. So this would be sitting space number 3. So this might be a bench or a hammock or just something small out there that brings us into that space, because if this sitting space does not exist, people don't feel invited to go out to that area. So it's actually quite important. And when we look at the front yard, there are often people wanting to sit somewhere out here. And there's a few reasons for that. You might have morning sun, you'd have your coffee out there in the morning, or some cul-de-sacs have lots of kids playing, and so the people will sit out in the front while their kids are on bicycles and running around so they can keep an eye on them. And sometimes there's a window from the wall here looking out into this garden space. It might be a home office, that sort of thing. And in which case we might put a water feature or some kind of special planting area there. So I would call that sitting space number 4. So that's kind of a hierarchy of sitting spaces that can happen. So then the next part is saying to yourself, is there also a hierarchy of walkways? So generally the front walkway would be number 1, because you need a way to get to the front door. And if you have kids and the school is over here, often there will be a trail in the grass going this way. So you may end up putting a walkway that comes this way too, through the front lawn, and it kind of ties in with that little sitting space. So there's definitely another option. And from here, you would decide which side does it make more sense to walk down. Would it be this side or it would be this side? If there's a door over here, generally I would say that this would be the side to walk on. But if there isn't, what we'll do is leave that hang until we find out what these sitting spaces are going to do and what their shapes are. So if I were going to say, even just looking at this, I would draw, maybe I'm going to draw a sidewalk that goes on and a little bit of a walkway here. So if I color that in, might look something like this. And in the back there may be a landing and there may be a patio space. And over here might be a walkway into here. We might do a connecting walkway. And this one might have a couple of stepping stones or just be floating over here. Probably have some plants around it. So then we get to decide what's the character of these side pathway spaces. So if I take another marker and I just kind of mark in the house, the basic outline, what we're doing is kind of creating a little conceptual feeling for how all of this works. Make sure I put those two doors on. And let's see what we have. So we have a nice little concept sketch. And we could color the patio spaces in a little bit. So then you start to have a sense of how it might look if you map this all out, just from a flow standpoint. And there will be those among you who say, but I don't like round shapes. So what do? I'm not interested in this. What I find is that when I deal with rounded shapes, it does keep me more open to possibilities at this stage of the design. So later on in the courses, we are going to choose a certain style, it might be angular, it might be squares. It's up to you. But at this point, you can still play with those kinds of shapes. So we might say, well, there's going to be a bit more of a boxy kind of thing going on here, which is great. We could just have a little square of something here. The landing could be square. We could have a straight walkway coming down here, going right over to here. So once again, I will just do a quick sketch. Showing the very basics of the property shape. Show the gate. Make sure I write the doors on. And so now we can see that we could do straight walkways down this way, coming this way, a straight walkway coming here. And what we end up with are two concept plans that show curvy versus square. And this might help you make some decisions about which way you'd like to go overall. But essentially they both have the same amount of walkway, the same amount of sitting spaces. I should probably expand this one a little bit. But they're going to have distinctly different characters. So that is a fun exercise to do if you want to get a sense of what's going to work on your property. I have a few pictures that will show you a little bit about geometry of flow. So this house, you can see they've taken out the grass in the front, and the front door is actually quite hard to see. There is looks like a mailbox here, which is showing up. It's kind of glowing in the picture. So in this case, people are walking up the driveway, doing a sharp right-hand turn into quite a narrow walkway, and then another sharp turn up into the sidewalk. So I would call this a bit of a blocked flow because it doesn't have a nice intuitive feeling to it. So if I were to rework a garden like this, I would be looking, could I make a little bit more flow happen like this? And I might even bring it down along the driveway and see if I could expand the feeling of this space right here by the door, and then allow people to come in here. And you could still have a small sidewalk or stepping stone area that comes from the driveway into that space, but it doesn't have to be quite so far up the driveway. And we could have a little bit more greenery here and a little bit more greenery here. And it really wouldn't take much to turn this around so that it feels like a nicer space to come into. So that's what I mean about really watching your departure, your destination, and what is the journey in between. Now those side yards can be quite interesting. What goes in a flowy space? Well, here's a great example of using some raised planters. So these are, they've got some fruit bushes in here, and they're going to put some vegetables in some of these. And it was an awkward feeling space. It wasn't just a rectangle. It was a bit flared. And this is a little bit of a pricier kind of treatment, but you can see they're dealing with some thresholds between the planters, so you're kind of stepping up and towards the gate. So it was a really great way to use that side garden. Some people's beside the garage space might have a concrete sidewalk. So here's one of those examples where there was a bit of a curve put into the sidewalk. You can see it right here, so that it gave a sense of flow. And this is going over to that door you can barely see in the side here. And there's a step going up. So you can see that putting a little bubble of planting in here can create quite a difference in how it feels. And the other part of the threshold feeling you can see is this arbor that they're walking through. So putting the vine on the arbor creates a doorway that moves from garage sidewalk space into their back living space. Sometimes flow can be really fun. In this case, there's a water feature coming from the front yard into this really spacious side yard. There's a water feature that flows around a gathering space. It's kind of like a harvest table barbecue area right here at the bottom of the picture. So what happens between this area, this walkway boardwalk over here, is that it turns into a bridge that actually goes over top of the water. So I like that kind of thing where it's like a surprise. You come around the corner and it's like, oh my gosh, I get to cross a bridge right now. How many people have that in their garden? It's quite fun. So flow can look like this. It doesn't have to be all neat and tidy and perfect. You can have big slabs of stone coming up a hillside, and once again you can see that there is a curve to it. So they've got this nice flow coming up the hillside, and they've anchored it with some stones. And I think one of my favorite parts is that they just allowed some of the perennials to come up in the pathway. So this is really a little garden pathway that has a lot of interest and excitement. So with all these different kinds of flowers, you'd be always looking at butterflies and bees and all kinds of creatures because of the variety of the plant material on its own. And it gives you what I would call a great stroll garden. Another surprise me transition would be doing a little bit of a dry creek bed between one patio area and another part of the garden. You put a big slab of rock, and again it's like a small bridge, but it has so much character and life to it. It's just really quite beautiful, and it would make a lovely addition off a main patio into a quieter area of the garden, or that third area that's often in another corner. So here's an example of things don't have to be curvy. And what I like about this one, this is a front garden. So this is the city sidewalk, and this is your typical bungalow front slab step. And they wanted to have a deck that was off to one side. So what happened here was the deck went all the way across like this, and it tied in so that each of these steps are now the same height, because we talked about how the soil had dropped at one time. So there's one step here. And if we really analyze what's going on here, there is a straight line from the sidewalk to the front door, isn't there? However, the experience of going up this front walkway is not straight because of the jogging of the landings. So that's kind of cool, is that it feels like it has flow. Visually it has flow, but somebody walking up here is actually still walking straight up to the front door. And my little so one of my pet peeves are when the landings and steps are not all the same height. So if you can make these slabs happen here and have all the risers the same height, then you've created a very successful project. Here's a typical side yard. You come in the back gate, and often the dogs will wear out this spot because they're coming up here to bark at the gate and see who's going by. So I like to put a little bit of a flow of stepping stones going through here. And we can take a look at how this is actually looking if we look at how the stones flow. You can see that there's a bit of that going on, and it creates a lovely journey again. And as these plants fill in, it'll be like you're walking through a little forest pathway. And lastly, here's a front entrance, and over here they've done a low wall and some pillars, and they've made a courtyard patio out in the front, and the walkway curves up nicely. There is a walkway going off to the side entrance, and just the way this tree and this pillar work together, there is a sense of a threshold, of a doorway that you're moving from one place into the next. And it's quite a great use of front yard space, because they had really an enormous amount of room out here, and the door is a little bit hidden. So again, this says doorway, you know, we're going through a thing, so there's probably the front doors over here, but it flows in a beautiful way. They could have gone straight here as well, and it still would have worked because of the geometry of the pillars in the wall. So I hope that gives you a nice sense of what's possible with the flow and with these spaces that we often say are dead spaces. You know, we can't really do anything over there anyway because it's north, or it's not wide enough, or there's a variety of reasons that people kind of give up on those spaces. But I think you can see that there are a lot of things that you could do that could make them quite beautiful and useful.